Hello and welcome to the 15th Scouching Report for the 2021 NHL Entry Draft, and today we're looking at one of the more interesting players that I certainly didn't expect to catch my attention as much as they did this season in Ayrton Martino of the Omaha Lancers. So in my work, I generally don't pay a ton of attention to the Ontario Junior Hockey League, which is Ontario's Junior A level league for players likely heading to the NCAA. But I certainly take note when the highest scoring non-overage player in a given season is a player who is not yet eligible for the NHL Draft. And in 2019-2020, that was Ayrton Martino in the OJHL. So I kind of filed him away as a player that I should keep my eye on, and after being quite impressed with some early season games that he played this season before jumping into the USHL, I thought I really should keep an eye on this guy, and let me tell you, boy am I ever glad that I did. Martino absolutely blasted through the USHL this season with 56 points in 38 games. And in the data that I tracked, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Ayrton Martino in the offensive direction was simply outstanding in the data that I tracked. While he put up just 72 overall pass attempts per 60 minutes at 5-on-5, a remarkable 27% of them were dangerous pass attempts to or through the high and medium danger areas of the ice, which is good for 19.2 dangerous pass attempts per 60 minutes. And not only did that put him 6th in my tracked work in terms of the volume of dangerous pass attempts, but his rate of completion for both dangerous and non-dangerous passes was virtually identical, and the percentage of dangerous pass attempts that he completed put him 3rd in my data set. So Ayrton Martino isn't just a guy who's throwing pucks in front of the net hoping someone's there. He is completing a lot of these pass attempts. That indicates to me that there might be some really good vision, some really creative offensive playmaking and skill to create those passing lanes, and really good awareness to identify targets and execute on those targets. But Martino on paper can also take matters into his own hands. He took over 10 dangerous shot attempts off of his own stick per 60 minutes in my tracking, and of all of his shot attempts, 79% were dangerous. So this is a player that attacks the middle often and very rarely has poor shot selection from the perimeter. And combining all of this together, it put Ayrton Martino at 7th in terms of overall offensive threat in my data set, and that on its own is really remarkable and worth looking into more. But it goes even further than that. Martino had 14.4 shot assists per 60 minutes in my track data, which puts him 8th. And all of this put together means that, at least at the junior level, it is blatantly clear that Ayrton Martino is one of the most talented offensive producers that you can probably find. And on his level, there are not many other players playing at the junior level that are such a strong case of dual threat offense in the truest sense. But with a situation like this, the questions that I always begin to ask is, what about the rest of the game for these players? Is Ayrton Martino just a player that you rely upon to do the last little bit of an offensive possession, creating offense and creating those final plays that can put the puck in the net? Yes, he can score off his own stick. Yes, he can make a play, but is there other things about his game that allow him to get into that position to score those points? And from there, I kind of look at offensive transitions. With just under 70 offensive transitions per 60 minutes and maintaining control on just under 70% as well, in both of those categories, he is top 40 in my data set. But when looking at all of Omaha's offensive transitions where Martino is involved, he drops to 68th. And there have been defensemen in my data set that are also playing pro hockey that are more involved in offensive transitions on average. So it does kind of indicate that while Martino is not just an inactive offensive only focused player, he isn't as involved in offensive transitions as a lot of other players that I've tracked in this year's draft. There are many forwards well over 30% involvement. But what it does indicate to me is that Ayrton Martino might be one of these players that needs some auxiliary help to do a little bit of the dirty work, get pucks into the neutral zone where he can start to take over play, and then in the offensive zone is where he's really at his best. But the next question is, how does he put up these results? Because there's a lot of players I've tracked at the junior level that can really run up some totals in some of these metrics, and I just don't really believe that it's projectable. But with Ayrton Martino, yeah, I think there's something here. To put things simply, Martino is a very diverse, offensively threatening player with great quick strike ability, with a great sense of processing play very quickly to create dangerous plays very quickly in the offensive zone. If an opponent makes any kind of mistake and he's anywhere near the puck, he will capitalize and make the opposing team pay for it. Get the puck, get in the offensive zone, make a play, and in the junior level this year, a lot of times that led to scoring points. He's not the fastest player on the ice when he's out there, he's not the most physically imposing player out there, but he knew how to find open ice in the neutral zone, and I found more often than a lot of prospects I've tracked this year, pucks just managed to find him in the neutral zone, and he could catch an errant pass here and there, and just quickly turn play around as well. And with Ayrton Martino, this is a player that brings creativity and skill to his offensive game. Some players who can put up levels of numbers like this can just bulldoze their way into the offensive zone and do whatever they want at the junior level, escape pressure through just brute force, or sometimes even just sheer luck. But Martino seems to know how to evade pressure with skill practically, create space for himself. This is a player who I felt had a bit of a hard time getting pucks under control, but once they were under control, he was pretty much off to the races and could be very difficult to shut down. He just has that sixth sense that I find really projectable of finding space under pressure, creating new passing lanes, and just managing to escape situations where you feel like a turnover could be likely. It also seems to be that teams know he's a dual threat offensive weapon, and he uses that to his advantage to deceive opponents into thinking he's taking a shot only to send passes across the ice or vice versa. But he can also just put the game on his back, attack the middle of the ice, and showed a willingness to get creative and attack the inside and generate scoring chances for himself. And even when he doesn't have the puck, he generated a lot of dangerous shot attempts for himself simply through just finding open space and having opponents not be able to pick him up. And while I don't really look at his pure shooting mechanics or the quality of his release and see a real high-end NHL goal scorer from anywhere on the ice, he certainly knows how to make himself dangerous, get himself into open ice in the middle of the ice, and get himself some chances. And this is where things start to get a little bit complicated. It seems to me that all of the things that make Ayrton Martino's offensive ability so special in this year's draft is special to the point that there's a bit of a detriment going on. Yes, he had a tendency to spot open ice in the neutral zone and be an excellent breakaway and breakout machine. But really often, he was chasing those breakouts and those breakaways without a real breakout being presented in the first place. And in doing so, putting his team a man down in their own zone for many valuable seconds. But this did seem to improve a bit, as when you look strictly at the amount of times he's exiting the defensive zone with control, which does include when he is in the neutral zone and receiving passes, that number declined from 31 per 60 minutes in the first two games I tracked to just 18 in the last 5 games I tracked combined. But while this tendency did decline, his offensive output didn't really fluctuate all that much throughout my tracking experience, which to me is a very good thing. Yes, his dangerous passes per 60 went from around 23 to 17, but his rate of individual shot attempts per 60 stayed relatively stagnant no matter which way you slice my tracked data. So to be clear, you're drafting Ayrton Martino for his offensive prowess. It's just objectively true. That is why you're picking him. His pace isn't extremely high, his mobility isn't extremely good, but I would say that when you compare that to his creativity and skill level and dual threat offensive output, it's really not that terrible. And he certainly doesn't really show the overhandling issues that I've seen in a few players that I've tracked this year that profile similarly with regards to their skill level and potential dual threat offense. And that skill and awareness when brought into the offensive zone is a big reason why his percentage completion on dangerous passes was amongst the best I've tracked this year. So we've talked a lot about his offensive game, and there's a lot of positive things to be said there, but what about the defensive side of the game for Ayrton Martino? And this is where things are really not quite as good. And it's not necessarily that he's bad defensively, it's more that his faults are more exposed in the defensive end. In defensive scenarios, he doesn't show a lot of impetus to close gaps, he lets the game come to him, and only when it involves his zone of influence does he really get involved defensively. I haven't seen a lot of pursuit defense out of Martino, and when I have, he doesn't keep his feet moving necessarily enough to continue sustaining defensive pressure to cause turnovers. He's more of an open ice defender, letting opponents come to him, making quick little stick checks to turn play around that way. And if play is stuck down low, he doesn't really collapse too deep down low, and instead he's more of the guy up near the blue line looking for that offensive breakout before it happens. But when he does get a chance to turn play around and drive play moving up the ice, it is something that I think makes up for a lot of issues in this area, but it will be something to examine moving forward. And this might be a good time to highlight where Martino's okay but not great overall pace of play might also expose more faults defensively. He has issues applying pressure in the defensive end and closing gaps in the defensive end and getting involved in shutting down cycles, but a bigger issue is on defensive rushes. he can get caught flat-footed a lot and cause a lot of controlled defensive transitions that you kind of don't really want to see out of your wingers, and he can get caught a step behind here and there, and there just isn't a lot of explosiveness to close those gaps effectively or physical in position to try to shut play down along the boards. And it just left me with the impression that if you're looking for a real 200-foot player in Ayrton Martino, I don't really think you're going to get it outside of capitalizing on opponent mistakes, quick stick checks when opponent players cut through his zone of influence on the ice, and catching errant passes in the neutral zone to turn play around offensively and open ice quickly. And this lack of pace can also seep into his offensive game here and there, especially when facing pressure, as he doesn't really have that much of an escape gear or explosiveness to escape that pressure. And if you can't escape that pressure with your speed, you need to rely on your body positioning and raw strength. And in that area, I also saw some hit or miss moments for Ayrton Martino. But before we move on to the next parts of the video, I want to say that per puck touch, Ayrton Martino is objectively a highly efficient and useful contributor in offensive transitions, and especially once the puck is in the offensive zone. And if he can be enabled with speedier, rangier 200-foot impact players where the defensive responsibility can be a little bit more alleviated, he could be an excellent dual-threat offensive weapon, and you might just need to adjust your expectations for how he plays his game on a 200-foot and shift-by-shift basis. So the best part of Ayrton Martino's game is his dual-threat offense. I'm not exactly sure how much goal scoring is going to follow him into the NHL, but his playmaking absolutely should. In many metrics, he is among the best playmakers that I have tracked in this year's draft, especially among junior players. And he is no slouch when it comes to generating individual chances for himself. He's got more than enough skill to navigate the offensive zone with care and possession of the puck, opening up lanes, scanning for opponents, scanning for line mates, and using enough patience to view the ice and then decide on what play he wants to make. And if that play he wants to make comes off of his own stick as a shot attempt, he cuts inside and tries to get into dangerous areas for his shot attempts, which to me is also very projectable. But far more often, I felt that Ayrton Martino was a much more threatening playmaker, especially from the perimeter and especially in a rush offense. But he's also got great quick strike playmaking when turnovers are caused in the offensive zone under pressure, as well as sustained offensive cycles for when he spots line mates that have some open space in front of the net. The good part of Martino's game is his sense of awareness for his line mates and general selflessness with the puck. He knows how to take care of the puck far more often than not. And if pace and mobility is a bit of an issue for Martino, which as of right now I think that it kinda is, you're going to need to make up for that in other areas of the game. And I think the biggest thing that can really help you dig out of a deficiency in pace and mobility is selflessness and awareness of your line mates all over the ice, whether you're in the defensive zone, the neutral zone, or the offensive zone. And to me, Martino has it. He shows a strong ability to identify opponents all over the ice, execute on those passing options with efficiency, and even under pressure, he knows how to find line mates and continue sustaining possession, moving pucks offensively. But these are all things that I think he'll need to refine in order to be as successful in the NHL as I think he could be, and his pace and mobility I think are still going to need to improve a little bit, but I think those things probably can improve when you're looking at how his game is right now. The not so good part really comes down to work rate and defensive ability. I can survive when drafting offensive leaning players and admitting that they probably will end up with some holes in their defensive game here and there. But with Martino, the big thing in that area of the game that I'm going to be looking for more of is consistency. Per 60 minutes of 5-on-5, there were 2 games where Ayrton Martino was involved in 35 defensive transitions. And all of the other 5 games I tracked were at 22 or lower, with 1 game under 10. In those 2 games where he had his highest defensive involvement percentage, his defensive controlled zone transition percentage was 40%, which is exactly what you need out of your wingers. But in the next 2 highest workload games, his defensive controlled zone transition percentage was 83% and 100% respectively, which to me is a blatant sign of at least defensive unreliability. He can get involved and close gaps and put in a stick check here and there, but he doesn't really do it if it's a necessarily difficult situation. If there's a relatively big gap to close, he can have some issues closing it. If it requires physical imposition, he can kind of struggle. But it is also a sign to me that when Martino keeps his feet moving and he's active on a shift-by-shift basis, he he can be an effective defensive winger. So when it comes to generating pure, unadulterated offensive threat in a variety of different ways, Martino is about as close to a standout as I'm going to find in this year's draft. But that comes at a cost, and the cost is his off-puck play and consistency with his work rate. And yes, that tendency to chase offense before it's even there did go away a little bit over the time I was tracking him, but it still was kind of there a bit as I went on. And I will note that that might have also been a bit of a tactical thing on Omaha's part, but if it is a trait strictly tied to Ayrton Martino's brain when it comes to hockey, it might be something that might need to be examined or modified or mitigated over time. So if we put NHL prospects on a spectrum from offensive lean to defensive lean, Ayrton Martino might be one of the heaviest offensive-leaning players that I've tracked this season. His offensive threat metric broke 30, which is remarkable. 13.3 dangerous passes completed per 60 minutes, and over 10 dangerous shot attempts per 60 minutes. Martino is just one of the most ruthless offensive threat players I've tracked. He's got a focus on playmaking, but there's enough mentality, awareness, and skill to attack the middle on his own stick and get chances for himself. He doesn't often buckle under pressure, and he can create space for himself often through his skill, and he has awareness of his line mates to assist in breakouts and create plays in the offensive zone really well. And while his defensive intensity needs some more work, and while his pace of play isn't as good as quite a few other players I've tracked this year, all that means to me is that you can't really use Martino as a quarterback for a line, but as an auxiliary complementary scorer that per puck touch can push efficiency really well and with great finishing skill can put points on the board. You could do a lot worse with where I'm seeing Martino ranked on some boards. And Martino is very nearly a 2020 eligible prospect, and that certainly needs to be factored in, especially considering that he's playing in the junior level. But if his ability to generate speed improves, and he learns how to chip in a little bit more defensively and use that added speed to close gaps and apply himself physically more often, he certainly could be a more dynamic 200-foot presence than he already is. But he definitely will need to cut down on those moments of strictly thinking about offense a lot and letting the game sort of come to him before he can turn play into something offensive. But at the end of the day, offense is offense. And a player like Martino, I think, should at least be a power play weapon in the National Hockey League that can play on pretty much any team's middle six, second or third line with enough vision and skill, playmaking ability, and pure scoring intensity to just drive decent results, and then you put him out on the power play where he can really flash some of that skill and creativity. And to me, he's one of these players that I think is capable of being so much more than he is right now. And yes, that can be frustrating, but when Martino is in a favorable situation where he is comfortable, he can be a real joy to watch play the game of hockey. And if he's a complimentary scorer that you can land in the mid to late second round, I think you could do a lot worse than Ayrton Martino. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, you could click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe on Patreon or click join below to join the YouTube membership program. You'll get access to early access to videos, a Discord server, written reports for all videos, data sheets and visualizations for hundreds of prospects both in and out of the NHL, or you can pick up some merchandise at the Scouchwear shop where 50% of all profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's all, and we'll see you in the next one.